Listen closely, for there is a kind of truth that never walks through the front door of the mind. It arrives sideways, like moonlight slipping through curtains, illuminating what you were never meant to guard so tightly. Every awakened soul knows this truth, but they do not preach it, they do not parade it. They hold it the way one holds a bird made of breathing light, gently, silently, with a certain amused tenderness. It is the truth that cannot be spoken without being misunderstood, the truth that dissolves the speaker the moment it is fully revealed. A forbidden truth not because it is dangerous, but because it is too liberating for a mind that still believes in its own chains. You might feel it now, a quiet tug somewhere beneath the noise of your identity, a subtle loosening around the heart, a sense that what you are is far older than the story you tell about yourself. And so we begin here in the soft threshold between knowing and unknowing, where truth hides not behind walls, but behind the illusion that there were walls at all. There is a strange habit the human mind carries, a habit so ancient and so intimate that we rarely notice its presence. It is the habit of tightening around experience, as though life were a thing that must be grasped before it slips away. This tightening becomes the architecture of the self, a structure built from memories, expectations, fears, and the quiet suspicion that something essential might be missing. And so we spend our lives reaching for certainty, reaching for control, reaching for an identity solid enough to silence the tremor of impermanence. But every awakened soul eventually sees that this tightening is the very source of our suffering. For what is grasping, really, but a refusal to let the river be a river? What is fear but the echo of a mind trying to hold a wave in the palm of its hand? We cling to our stories as though they were life rafts in a storm. Yet the storm itself is made of the same material as the raft, and the raft of the same material as the ocean. The forbidden truth, the one quietly guarded, is that the self we fear losing was never truly there to begin with. It is a costume woven from thought, a momentary arrangement of echoes, pretending to be a permanent sound. To see this clearly is unsettling at first, not because it diminishes us, but because it unveils how vast we truly are, a vastness without edges, without ownership, without a singular point from which life is observed. Most people do not want this kind of freedom. They want a prettier cage, not the absence of walls. They want enlightenment, as long as they can bring their name with them. And so the awakened remain quiet, for they understand how frightening it is to approach the truth without the armor of identity. Let me ask you gently, what part of you is clinging now? And who is the one noticing the clinging? In this noticing, a small crack appears in the fortress of the self. Light enters, softly, patiently, without demand. If the first crack in the illusion comes from noticing our own clinging, the second comes from recognizing the quiet machinery behind it. The mind is a brilliant storyteller, so brilliant, in fact, that it forgets it is telling a story. It spins narratives about who we are, who we should be, and who we must never become. It threads these narratives into the past and future, then invites us to live inside them, as though they were the solid ground of reality. And yet, if you look closely, you'll notice something curious. The storyteller is never fully satisfied with its story. It revises itself constantly, tightening the plot here, adding a fear there, decorating the edges with hope and regret. This is the architecture of the inner landscape, a landscape built not of events, but of interpretations. We suffer not because life is unkind, but because the story we tell about life leaves no room for the unfolding mystery of it. Every awakened soul eventually sees this. They see that the mind's version of reality is a translation, a poetic one sometimes, a fearful one at others, but still a translation. And no translation is ever the real thing. Imagine looking at the moon only through its reflection in a pond, rippled, distorted, convincing enough to believe in, but never quite the moon. Most people chase the reflection their whole lives, believing it to be the source of light. This is why the awakened remain gentle. They understand the delicacy of confronting a truth that asks you to step out of your own reflection. It feels like losing the world, when, in fact, It is the world returning to you. You may notice this in subtle ways. The moment after a breath when everything is still, the soft silence between thoughts, the flicker of recognition that you are aware, even when the mind is busy rearranging its stories. And in that recognition lies the forbidden truth. That awareness is not a character within the story, but the space in which the story arises, a space that cannot be wounded by its content, cannot be diminished by its failures, cannot be enhanced by its successes. Tell me, when you look inward now, are you looking at the story or at the space in which the story appears? To understand the forbidden truth more clearly, we must walk around it from several angles, like observing a mountain at dawn, watching how each shift of light reveals another contour of the same ancient presence. From the human perspective, we cling to identity because it offers familiarity. We feel safer inside a well-worn story than in the open expanse of the unknown. The mind whispers, be someone consistent, be someone important. Yet even as we obey, a quiet rebellion grows within us, a longing to breathe without the weight of defending the character we are playing. Psychology tells us the self is constructed, a patchwork of conditioning, memory, reward, avoidance, and narrative stitching. A practical character, useful, efficient, and entirely make-believe, like a puppet that forgot the strings are imaginary. This isn't an insult to the self. It is a gentle comedy of consciousness, a Zen punchline whispered through neurons. One awakened soul once laughed and said, trying to fix your ego is like trying to give CPR to a soap bubble. And he wasn't far off. Spiritually, the truth becomes even more transparent. Awareness is prior to identity, prior to thought, prior even to the sense of I am. The awakened know this not as belief, but as direct experience, the way one knows water by touching it, not by reading a label. They see that the self is a wave and awareness is the ocean, beautiful in its motion, but never separate from its source. Nature, as always, says these things without ever saying them. A tree does not cling to its leaves. When autumn arrives, the sky does not complain. When clouds rearrange themselves, the river does not ask permission before changing shape. And yet we, peculiar creatures that we are, attempt to freeze ourselves as though life were a sculpture rather than a dance. Each angle points to the same silent truth. We suffer only when we refuse to flow with what we already are. From the existential view, the tension of being human comes from our strange position between infinity and impermanence. We feel the vastness within us, that quiet sense of more that no achievement ever satisfies. And yet we also feel the fragility of the body, the ticking of time, the uncertainty of tomorrow. Caught between these two winds, the mind invents a self that pretends to be the anchor, but the awakened know the anchor is made of smoke, and the sea it longs to steady was never dangerous to begin with. There is a subtle humor here, a cosmic joke hidden in plain sight. We spend our lives trying to secure a version of ourselves that the universe never asked us to maintain. It's like a wave trying to stay upright in the middle of the ocean so it can look respectable to the other waves. When we bring others into the picture, the illusion grows even more elaborate. We play roles in each other's stories, projecting, expecting, defending, and calling the entire ritual being understood. But no one has ever truly met the self you believe yourself to be. They only meet their interpretation of your interpretation of an identity you created, a three-layer mirage dancing with 1,000 reflections, yet awareness. The truth beneath all masks recognizes itself in every set of eyes, not as a personality, but as the silent space in which personalities appear. And here lies the forbidden truth, revealed in its most paradoxical form. You do not become awakened by discovering something new, but by seeing through everything you once believed was you. Freedom arrives not through addition, but subtraction, not by polishing the self, but by noticing it was a temporary costume, hanging loosely on a timeless presence. The awakened hold this truth gently, not because it is fragile, but because the world is fragile in its readiness, tender in its longing, uncertain in its courage to look inward. And so they speak softly, smiling at the cosmic comedy of it all, whispering the same truth in countless ways to those who are ready to listen. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, almost shy in its arrival, when the mind's story loosens its grip, just enough for something deeper to be seen. Not learned, not attained, but revealed, like a curtain parting by itself, in a room you thought was already open. This moment rarely appears during effort. It does not arrive when you try to meditate, or when you strain to reach spiritual insight, or when you chase the idea of awakening, as though it were a prize waiting on a distant mountaintop. It appears in the spaces between effort, the soft places, the in-between breaths, the moments when you forget to pretend that you are only the person with your name. At first, it feels like a small shift, a slight widening, a spaciousness behind your thoughts, or perhaps beneath them, as though awareness were quietly expanding, beyond the edges you once assumed were fixed. You may notice that the voice in your mind continues speaking, but you are no longer inside the voice. You are watching, listening, allowing. The thoughts move, but they no longer define the one who sees them. It is a gentle uncoupling, a dissolving of identity, back into the softness from which it emerged. In this moment, the forbidden truth begins to reveal itself, not as an idea, not as a philosophy, but as a palpable sensation, a recognition that the self you defended so fiercely was a character in a play you were watching. From the very beginning, the fear of losing yourself turns out to be the fear of losing the story, not the watcher of the story. And the watcher has been here long before the character appeared, and will remain long after the character dissolves. This realization is disorienting at first, like waking from a dream and needing a moment to remember which version of you is real. But slowly, the disorientation softens into a kind of clarity that feels ancient, as if it belonged to you before you belonged to the world. You notice that awareness is not something you do. It is what you are. When you are not busy being someone else, a stillness untouched by the rise and fall of thoughts, emotions, histories, or the endless weather of the mind. In this stillness, the boundaries of the self grow thin. You feel less like a solid figure, moving through a hostile universe, and more like an open window through which life passes freely. There is no longer a hard line between you and experience, no longer a separate observer, clutching at the events of life as though they were possessions. Everything begins to happen by itself, through itself, as itself, and the forbidden truth becomes unmistakable. The self you believed you were is not the one who is reading these words. The one who is reading is the same awareness that has witnessed every version of you you have ever played. This realization does not shout. It does not explode. It unfolds softly, like dawn spreading its first pale light across a quiet horizon. And with it comes a strange, tender relief, a sense that you have been carrying an unnecessary burden for far too long, the burden of being someone, the burden of maintaining an identity that never needed to be defended in the first place. It is here, in this widening quiet, that the awakened soul feels a gentle smile rise, not of triumph, but of recognition, a remembering, a return. As this recognition deepens, something remarkable begins to shift. The mind, which once seemed to be the ruler of your inner kingdom, is revealed as a visitor, a guest who talks loudly, gestures wildly, and occasionally rearranges the furniture, but a guest nonetheless. You are not the visitor. You are the space in which the visitor speaks. This shift is subtle but seismic. It changes the entire architecture of perception. The world no longer appears as something external, pressing itself against you. Instead, it arises within you as waves arise within the ocean, not separate, not foreign, not other. This gentle collapse of separation is what every awakened soul guards so silently, not because it is secret, but because it cannot be carried in the language of ordinary understanding. To speak it too plainly, is to have it mistaken for philosophy, when in truth it is a direct, wordless experience. In this moment, you recognize that awareness has no border, no inside, no outside. Everything you see, everything you hear, everything you feel is happening right here, in the intimate expanse of consciousness. And then comes the most astonishing realization of all. You are not in the universe is in you. Not you as a personality, but you as this open field of knowing in which stars, thoughts, sensations, and even time itself rise and fall, like sparks drifting through a vast night sky. Here, the forbidden truth becomes luminous. There is no separate self to protect, no personal identity to preserve, no little island of me floating in a sea of not me. There is only the seamless movement of awareness exploring itself in countless forms, through countless eyes, in countless moments. This is why awakened souls do not cling to their own awakening. They laugh at the thought of enlightenment as a personal achievement. It would be like a wave boasting that it finally learned how to be water. And so the forbidden truth is held quietly, not out of secrecy, but out of compassion. For the mind, in its innocence, is terrified of limitlessness. It wants edges to lean on, a name to respond to, a story to inhabit. It wants to know where I end, and everything else begins. But awareness gently dissolves that boundary, like sunlight dissolving mist. In this dissolving, a great peace emerges, the peace that comes from no longer pretending to be smaller than you are, a peace born not from answers, but from the disappearance of the one who was desperately seeking them. You may find in this stillness that your breath moves more freely, not because you tried to breathe better, but because the tension that held the breath hostage has begun to loosen. You may notice sensations rise and fall without resistance. Emotions appear like weather patterns, beautiful in their impermanence. Thoughts drift across the mind, like birds migrating across an endless sky. Nothing stays, nothing clings, nothing needs to be pushed away. For the one who was pushing is no longer at the center. Center and circumference have merged into a single spacious awareness. And in this merging, you realize why awakened souls guard this truth with such tenderness. If you give this truth to a mind too early, it will try to own it. If you give it to a heart not yet ready, it will feel like annihilation. But when it arrives in its own time, it feels like coming home, to a place you never actually left. A home beyond identity, beyond effort, beyond becoming. A home made of pure presence, quietly shining behind every moment. When the realization settles, it does so not with thunder, but with a kind of soft gravity, a reorientation so subtle you almost miss the moment it happens. Life continues, yet everything feels slightly rearranged, as though someone quietly opened a window. In a room you didn't know had grown stale, the mind still speaks. Thoughts still rise. Old habits still wander in, like polite visitors who haven't realized you've moved to a different house. But something essential has changed. You no longer mistake the visitors. For the owner of the home, there's a spaciousness now, a sense of breathing room inside each experience. Even discomfort, which once felt like an intruder, begins to appear as a ripple in the same vast ocean of awareness that holds joy, curiosity, and silence. You respond differently to life, not because you are trying to, but because the one who was reacting has softened into the background. The sharp edges of identity begin to round themselves like stones smoothed by years of flowing water. You notice this especially in the small moments, the sound of footsteps on a quiet morning, the delicate way sunlight rests on the surface of a cup, the subtle warmth in the chest when you are doing absolutely nothing at all. These moments, once overlooked, now glow with a kind of unearned significance, as though life itself were leaning in to remind you of its simplicity. Awareness becomes less like a practice and more like the natural atmosphere in which your days unfold. You do not return to presence. you realize you never left. Even forgetfulness is just another movement within awareness. There is no failure, only shifting patterns on the canvas of consciousness. Relationships change, too, not because others behave differently, but because you no longer carry the old urgency to be understood, defended, or confirmed. The self you once protected now feels transparent, porous, open. You listen more fully, not from a center trying to maintain itself, but from a spaciousness that allows people to be exactly as they are. This is the quiet beginning of integration, the moment where truth does not need to be spoken or displayed or celebrated, only lived softly, like a breeze passing through open fields. As this integration deepens, life begins to move differently. Events that once seemed urgent now arrive as gentle suggestions. The world is still full of noise, but you are no longer trapped in it. You are the silence in which it unfolds. Your thoughts become companions rather than captors. Emotions are like clouds drifting across a sky that remains untouched beneath them. Even desire, frustration, and fear lose the sharpness they once carried, because the awareness that observes them is neither threatened nor incomplete. Nature, too, seems to shift in tone. A river is no longer just water moving downstream. It is life's movement itself, simply arising in a form you can see. The wind across the trees becomes a gentle reminder that all motion is temporary, all form is transient, and yet the essence of seeing remains ever present. There is a calm laughter here, a quiet amusement at the absurdity of clinging to the self as if it were a fortress. You realize that trying to be good or be wise is like polishing a wave and expecting it to stay still. The wave will rise and fall anyway, and yet the ocean is always whole. Even the body is felt differently. Each sensation is received without judgment, without pushing, without expectation. Pain and pleasure, tension and ease, all become teachers, all simply movements. Within the field of consciousness, you notice a reflective pause in your own experience, a space where nothing is required, where even awareness itself can rest. Here, in this quiet interlude, the forbidden truth gently settles. Freedom is not achieved. It is recognized. It has always been here, like the sky behind clouds, like the ocean beneath the waves, like the breath you never had to invent. The awakened soul carries this truth, not as a possession, but as a gentle way of being. It permeates ordinary life, washing dishes, walking down the street, feeling the sunlight on the skin, or noticing a bird calling across the morning. Each gesture becomes sacred, not because it is special, but because it is fully alive. And in this living, there is a profound simplicity. Everything is exactly as it should be, and yet nothing needs to stay the same. A moment of silence, soft, tender, unclaimed, reminds you that the truth is always here, waiting quietly for recognition. And now, in this quiet moment, we rest in what has been revealed. The forbidden truth, once hidden behind layers of fear, is no longer distant or abstract. It is here, present in the simplest awareness of being. Notice how the self, once so urgent, has softened into a gentle presence. It is no longer a fortress, no longer a character that must be maintained. It is the spaciousness in which all thoughts, all emotions, all experiences arise and dissolve. And this spaciousness does not demand your labor. It only invites your attention, a calm acknowledgement of what already is. Life continues around you, but you move through it differently, not because the world has changed, but because the one who witnesses it has realized there is nowhere to cling and no one to save. Even loss becomes a ripple, even grief becomes a passing cloud, and joy is not clutched, but allowed to wash over you, like sunlight sliding across a quiet lake. This awareness is not an achievement, nor is it a goal. It is the recognition that you have never left home. The ocean of consciousness was never separate from the wave, the sky never separate from the bird in flight, and the observer never separate from what it observes. And so, we end not with closure, but with spaciousness. The reflection remains open, inviting the mind to soften, inviting the heart to rest, inviting the soul to simply notice. That all of this, every thought, every breath, every moment of seeming struggle or delight, is part of the dance that has always been alive within you. If this reflection touched you, let it rest quietly within you, and share it with someone who might need to hear it